Welcome to this CTA Foundation CES 2021 session. My name is Steve Ewell, and I'm the Executive Director of the Consumer Technology Association Foundation. And I'm pleased to be joined today by Andrew Buss, the Deputy CIO for Innovation and Management of the City of Philadelphia, and Eric Reed, the Vice President of Entertainment and Tech Policy at Verizon, and also a CTA Foundation trustee. Welcome, Andrew and Eric. So happy to have you join us at CES this year.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Steve.
Well, this year has driven home the importance of digital connections for people at work, school, social activities. All of that has moved online. How has the city of Philadelphia helped its residents meet that need?
Yeah, it really happened quickly with the pandemic back in March. And I think, once we figured out how to make city employees work remotely, which was a bit of a challenge in itself, as it might not be surprising, we really did start to think about some of the challenges our residents were having, both around work and remote schooling and all sorts of other things. Health would be another one, telehealth. So there were a couple things I can think of that we did pretty quickly on in the pandemic. We have an organization in the city called the Digital Literacy Alliance, which is essentially a grant-making organization for small community organizations for digital equity projects. We did two separate grants in April, I believe. One was really just an emergency technology grant where we looked at our existing grantees and gave them a chunk of money to use to help them enable their remote work, because I think there were a lot of challenges across these community organizations. Just weren't really prepared to do that, even to work themselves remotely, much less serve their clients remotely. So there was that slice of the grant and got some interesting feedback from that. And then the other piece was really creating what we call digital navigation as a program. The idea there being that you essentially have a hotline where a resident could call and ask for help as they are trying to connect to the internet, as they're trying to use a PC, as they're trying to do basic technology functions. That's something that is, it's not brand new to Philadelphia. It's out there, but I think it's something that we decided was really important at the time, and we ended up funding, I think, 3 organizations to do that digital navigation. And that's still continuing today. And then this is all kind of set within the context of not really being sure what's going to happen with our public computing centers, right? Because those were the public access places that we had before the pandemic. And then suddenly they're all closed, as are the library technology centers. So, and that's part of what we'll be talking about, and Eric will talk about along with me, is how do we re-envision those places, knowing that we are still in a pandemic, but ideally we'll soon end this, and probably thinking about that blend of in-person and remote learning.
Well, that really is incredible, because, those areas of access and opportunities are so important to the community. Eric, can you talk a little bit about how Verizon's gotten involved with this to help support some of this work?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been a real pleasure having this conversation with Andrew over many, many months, and a number of his colleagues over at the Office of Innovation and Technology with the City of Philadelphia. A lot of this, again, is, as Andrew has pointed out, was driven by the pandemic. And we all have been made aware of folks that have been challenged by the digital divide. If you don't have the technological tools readily available, it's very difficult to do anything. And so partnering with the city in terms of having that larger conversation around what is the utility of the technology? What's the end goal here? How can we connect the dots? What are the resources that are available that we can deploy so that it can have the greatest impact across the city for all residents of Philadelphia, for small businesses? And so having those conversations over many, many months, beginning last year, and seeing it evolve has really just been just an awesome effort by both Verizon and our colleagues at the city. Just a number of ways in which technology impacts us from a healthcare standpoint, from an educational standpoint, small businesses that have also been impacted by the pandemic. We really had to think innovatively and outside of the box in terms of driving those types of solutions. And so a lot of the work that we've been doing has been focused on digital inclusion. How do we promote those sort of workforce development opportunities as well for people that may have been impacted, particularly waiters and waitresses in the restaurant industry. How do we provide them tools for reskilling their work so that they can find other and new opportunities for employment? So there's a laundry list in terms of the impacts that technology has, and it's just been a really worthwhile effort working with the city to ensure that kids, K through 12 students, or even college students, have the digital assets in their toolbox to be able to stay connected with their fellow students and teachers, for patients and physicians to stay connected as well. There's just a number of different opportunities that have been made available as a result of this relationship at the city. So we're really excited about that partnership continuing going forward as well.
Well, I love to see. Oh, go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, I was just going to add something to what Eric said. He sort of hit on the three pieces that we in the city, when we talk about this issue, consider really important, and that you have to have this basic level of digital equity, digital inclusion, whatever you want to call it. And it's really, there are three pieces. One is that internet access, so basic access to decent internet connectivity. The second is, do you have the right device to access that connectivity? That's proving to be a more significant challenge than a lot of people think, right? Because we hear a lot about the affordability of internet. Do people see the value in internet? But it's turning out that a lot of people do not have the right device. Perhaps they can't afford the right laptop to access the internet. And then the third piece is that digital literacy that Eric was talking about. You know, are you able to do medical appointments online? That's not that easy a thing, really, for a lot of people to do. Are you able to do online banking? Are you able to do these Zoom calls that you need to do for work? So I think our approach has been to really focus on those three areas. And I think as we're moving forward with the work, our own work and our work with Eric and Verizon, those three pieces are really front and center.
Well, that is where it's so important to see, the public sector and the private sector coming together to, result in better solutions for the community that you're both serving. So it's very exciting to see all that come together and touch on so many critical aspects that are important to our daily lives and, creating opportunities for people moving forward. Andrew, you mentioned how this is really building off a long history of investment in technology that the city's undertaken. And then that's kind of built up and led to where you're able to do the work that you're doing today. Can you share a little bit about how those early investments really help pay off and bring us to the point where we can provide these services to so many people in the community?
Yeah, sure. So there are a few milestones that really stick out for me. And I think most of them are kind of cumulative in that they do add up to what you were just talking about, which is where we are today with a pretty good foundation around this kind of work. If you go way back, there was a program in the city called Wireless Philadelphia. The idea was basically a municipal wireless system to connect people who had affordability issues for the internet. I think if you go out and look at the literature, it's generally agreed that program failed. But what it did do for us subsequently was create this really interested, committed group of stakeholders around the issue of internet access and technology, public technology. So that when I'm going back to the last recession now, when we had all that stimulus money come out, particularly the broadband stimulus money during the last recession, there were some competitive applications that the city and a whole bunch of partners did. We wrote them. Ultimately, and that's how we created our public computing center program, which I may have already referred to as the KeySpot program. That's always been what we've called it. So we're building this physical infrastructure kind of out of the ashes, I suppose, of Wireless Philadelphia's program, which I was not involved with, by the way. I just want to put that out there and make it clear. So fast forwarding then from KeySpots, that's a program lasted quite a while and still exists today. If you go to around 2016, 2017, we created an organization I mentioned before as well called the Digital Literacy Alliance, which is essentially a seed fund for grant making in the digital equity space. So we've done maybe 5 or 6 grant rounds now up through 2020, really for a variety of different purposes, kind of adapting to kind of current times as we did with the pandemic and the digital navigation program. So that organization still exists as well. And I think of that as kind of the, I guess, the innovation foundation here. So I often think of there are three things you need again in the space here. Physical infrastructure, which I think a lot of that we've handled through KeySpot and public technology programs, and then moving into some of that as we improve the bandwidth at our centers. There's also kind of the innovation side of things, and I think that's what's largely been missing for a long time in the space. And so it's great that we have this digital literacy allowance now that allows us to fund innovative ideas. And then I think probably the other thing Philly has going for it that is pretty cool is a kind of a people infrastructure, as I think of it. So it's a very committed group of people doing this work. An organization called the Technology Learning Collaborative, which is really kind of a professional development networking organization. So if you can sort of balance those three pieces and develop them along the way, I think it really gives you a good foundation. And that kind of took us up to, I guess, the next milestone, which was probably PHL Connected as a city program, a large city program in response to the pandemic to address K through 12 remote learning. So something that started over the summer was extremely intense because we tried to get it set up for fall. We did get it set up for fall, and that's operating now. So that kind of takes us into today, and the conversations I've been having with Eric and his team, just thinking about, okay, we have these foundational pieces now, right? We have specifically some of these KeySpot public technology centers that are run by our Parks and Recreation Department. What do we do with those? How do we kind of take them to the next level? Well, you probably have to have really good internet there, right? That would be one thing. You probably have to have, going back to my earlier argument, you have to have the devices or the machines at the center that can support the internet and help people do some of these creative things. And then you have to have some sort of interaction, I would think, with sort of the professional community of organizations in Philadelphia that can really drive some of the programming, help people learn how to use the technology, show them how to do telehealth, things like that. So that's kind of the arc of the work. And I think it builds really nicely. And I'm sort of curious to see where it goes next. I'm not sure, honestly, at the time.
Yeah, I love the point that Andrew made around robust connectivity, because as Andrew well knows, a lot of the conversation over the last year as related to the pandemic and education was distance learning. So if you couldn't connect families with elementary, middle, or high school students at home, there was no opportunity for them to continue their learning. So what are the other opportunities to supplement if there's no connectivity in the home? As Andrew pointed out, the public access centers, they need to have robust connections to do these type of interactive Zoom platform type of calls, where the students can still engage in a classroom-like setting, a virtual classroom-like setting, with their students and teachers. And so a lot of the investments Verizon's been making, we just announced earlier this week our Verizon Fios Forward service opportunity, where it's a $19.99 per month broadband option for less resourced families that can get access to, at a minimum, a 200 meg connection that's synchronous. So that's 200 megs going up and down, which is enough speed for the sort of interactive educational sessions that the teachers and students can have with each other. So having those robust connections, we of course announced 5G. We launched that in the city of Philadelphia as well back in October, mid-October of last year. So when you think about having those robust connections, providing those connections throughout the city or in the public community centers, you're providing additional opportunities for those that have been on the wrong side of the digital divide to be able to connect and to be able to enhance their K through 12 learning. On top of the connectivity, you still need robust programming as well. So you need to have programming, STEM and STEAM related programming that's relevant. The digital literacy piece that we've talked about as well. It doesn't matter if you have a strong broadband connection and a device, but you don't know how to use those tools. So you have to provide that sort of programming. And that's applicable not only from the educational side, but also for senior citizens that might be intimidated by technology. So we're really excited about putting all of the pieces of the puzzle together to ensure that Philadelphia residents and businesses can do their best work, so to speak, and can enhance their own personal lives.
I think another thing to Eric's point that has made the Key Spot program really successful was very simple, really. And it was that we programmed in a resource, a human resource, to be at the center and act as basically the tech instructor or tech support, whatever you want to think of it. I mean, the idea of a public computing center is not new, right? This has been around for a long time. But I think a lot of times what you would see is that we would create these centers and we would have internet access and there would be a PC and that would be it. And we just assumed that people would come in and use these things, when in reality, maybe they didn't know how to do it. So without that human person there, and that's the challenge now with the pandemic, you don't have this in-person resource there. So we'll have to figure that out. But you really need that additional piece of the puzzle there in order to make people want to use the machines and able to access the internet.
That's really incredible. And, I think, we talk about the opportunities to teach people about the ways to use technology. That's something that the CTA Foundation's invested a lot of resources into around the country, is helping different nonprofit organizations and other communities provide that training. But it shows that the technology is really a tool. It can help, but having that person or the resources available to provide that education and learning is really a critical piece to the component. So glad to hear kind of how you've been able to do that. And then going to some of the things that Eric had mentioned, the STEM and STEAM education. And I know we're actually going to have a whole longer conversation a little bit later today with Eric talking about representation and the opportunities to create greater career opportunities through STEM and STEAM education. But I'd love to kind of dive in a little bit into, how are you able to kind of open up new career opportunities for people by creating awareness about the opportunities for these types of programs?
Yeah, sure. So we announced last year a partnership with the Urban League of Philadelphia Workforce Development Initiative, which again put tools into the hands of folks that may not be tech savvy, may have been intimidated by technology, may not have had the exposure to technology, and as we well know, it's a part of our everyday lives. So again, the pandemic sort of accelerated the need for folks to be able to transition into new opportunities and to new jobs so that they can continue to be able to put food on the table, pay rent, all of those sorts of things. And so by opening up with this partnership with the Urban League, we've been able to set up these labs where people can get training, they can learn a little bit more about even basic skills like developing a resume or learning how to use a computer program. And those sort of things are critically important in terms of providing folks the confidence to feel like that they can transition from their current role or their current position where there may not be a future for them, and be able to transition into another job where there might be additional opportunities that may be afforded to them to be able to make more money or to be able to develop other skills and training. So it's that is just one such opportunity that we have looked at in terms of, again, reskilling the workforce with the Urban League. And, these are sort of that measure alone, when you think about the opportunity to allow someone to have the confidence to transition into a new role it's critically important. And technology is really the glue that allows that transition to happen.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think there's a tendency that I've observed to, for people who are involved with programs or maybe even make policy, to really think of some of these things in a vacuum. And I think we're really trying to get away from that now. So, for example, Eric was talking a lot about what we in the city describe as workforce development, right? And there's a tendency, I think, within that space to not think of technology, how you imbue technology there as much as you need to, really, right? Because as Eric said, pretty much all of workforce development is now dependent on having some technology access and ability to use it. So trying to connect workforce policy with technology policy in the city, I think is really important for this to succeed, because otherwise you have these jobs programs that are, they're really aren't able to be very effective because they haven't considered how to use technology to sort of enable the job search, the job finding, the resume building, all those kinds of things.
Yeah, and look, I'll just add too, since we've talked a lot about the pandemic, our company committed about $750,000 as it related to small businesses that have been impacted by the pandemic. And a lot of that, when you think about small businesses not being able to conduct their normal operations, they had to transition quickly to more of a contactless environment. So for those small businesses that may not have been ready with a contactless platform for payments, those are sort of just the opportunities where you're allowing a small business owner to be able to pivot quickly, leveraging technology so that they can hopefully be able to maintain some level of normalcy in terms of how they're operating their business, but also generate the important sales, right? And manage their cash flow.
We've touched on it a little bit, but the CTA Foundation's mission is really focused around how we can use technology to help older adults and people with disabilities. And we've kind of talked about a few different ways that these programs that you're doing may be able to help. But Andrew, I'd love to kind of dig into are there other efforts that you're doing or the city's doing that can help impact these populations?
Yeah, I think we have a couple examples, and I think just another observation is that I think the K through 12 space and students and kids, it's a really obvious space, right? Everyone wants to help kids learn remotely and all that. And I think there's a tendency to forget some of the other parts of the population. So I think one thing we've tried to do through the Digital Literacy Alliance is really consider, not just K through 12, but also some of these other segments of the population. So we've done a couple of grants for seniors. One was kind of a foster grandparent program where it was really multi-generational, where they were learning how to use social media so that they could work with their grandkids that they were raising and kind of know what was happening with them. So it's like a dual technology teaching program. So that was kind of interesting. I think you guys, we've already talked about some of the work that's going on with teaching tablets to seniors, obviously because that's an easy motion. It's an easy way for seniors to become more facile with technology because the swipe is pretty effective for them as you get more challenged with your physical abilities. And then the other one that we just funded, actually, it was part of the digital navigation program I mentioned earlier, was an organization that specifically focuses on physically disabled clients. And it was really digital navigation for that population. So a little bit different, knowing that that the client is going to be using a little different technology, whether it's visually impaired, hearing impaired, whatever, in order to access the technology. So we have digital navigation for specific language populations, just as we might have digital navigation for physically disabled populations.
Those are all really incredible programs. And yeah, we've been thrilled to support the Generations Online program up in Philadelphia and the work that they're doing there. And there's just so much more that we can do for these communities. Here we are kind of at CES, and there's a couple topics that are really big topics across the industry right now, one of which is certainly 5G. Another is smart cities. As you're looking at these types of programs and rolling out 5G, as Eric had shared earlier, are there ways that you're able to take advantage of some of the new kind of smart city solutions to benefit the population in Philadelphia?
Yeah, I think so. And I would say we're still figuring out what those are. Honestly, I mean, the way I think of that is that really gives you, going back to that concept of really fast connectivity. I go back to that, right? And I think what we need to do sort of within the city is help people understand what that enables, right? Because we're not used to that speed and we don't know what it enables yet. So I think there's that exercise. And I think, Eric and others will help us go through it where they can say, okay, this is really fast internet. You don't need to just have a couple people in a room doing resumes. You can do a whole bunch of other stuff that requires higher bandwidth that you could not have done before. So, we're still thinking about that internally. Maybe we're a little behind the curve in a way. Eric probably has seen in some other cities some ways that people are taking really interesting advantage of 5G.
Yeah, and look, I think about it as a white piece of paper that is open to all sorts of ideas. It's really about, again, how this partnership with the city really started, which was, we want to make sure that we're incorporating innovative technology, emerging technology, and all those tools to drive solutions at the local community level. How can, stuff like how can City Hall be more accessible to its residents, leveraging technology platforms, smart lighting, smart transportation for some of the municipal buses to be able to run the most efficient routes through the city, while also providing real-time information to those that are using those buses to be able to know when a bus is coming to their direction, coming to their bus stop. The opportunity is endless, and I think that's what's so exciting about this. This is not something that is static, that has a start and an end goal. It's really about how do we shape the dynamic nature of technology to produce better outcomes for all the stakeholders, whether it's the city, its residents, the businesses, companies like Verizon, and also our community partners and nonprofit entities as well that have a role in all this. So the opportunities, again, are endless or limitless, so to speak. And it's just really, I think, just an exciting endeavor to think about how we can take robust connections and really do great things and extract great utility and value from those investments.
Those are all really incredible examples. And, I really appreciate you both spending some time to share some of the work that you're doing together. Andrew, if people want to learn more about the work that you're doing with the City of Philadelphia, where should they go to get more information?
Well, let's see. We have a pretty decent website. In fact, we just redid it. Our team just redid it. So you could go to phila.gov, look at Office of Innovation and Technology, and there is a segment about our particular group. We're kind of split across a bunch of things, from innovation capacity to smart cities to digital equity to communication. So it's all in there. And then anything more specifically that people want to know, I think, we have about a 10-person team, and we can connect them to whoever is doing that relevant work.
Okay, that's great. And Eric, how about for you and Verizon?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a new corporate social responsibility program called Citizen Verizon, and they can go to citizenverizon.com and learn a little bit more about sort of how Verizon wants to create shared success with all of our stakeholders, whether it is, again, nonprofits, residents, education based systems, so on and so forth. But it's really about how are we empowering technology to ensure and promote better outcomes at the local level in our local communities where we work, live, and play. And so if they go to that website, they will learn a lot more about the impacts of technology on energy sustainability and other important issues that are relevant to the community at large.
Well, that's great. I really appreciate both of you being here today and sharing so much incredible work that you're doing for the community. So thank you again for joining us at CES 2021.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
Great. Thank you, Steve.
And for the audience, if you're interested in learning more about the CTA Foundation, you can go to ctafoundation.tech. And I hope you have a wonderful CES 2021.